it doesn't hurt. It doesn't cost you anything to ask questions. Give it a shot. Who knows? Maybe you are not too dumb to be a pastor. I made it. Welcome to another episode of Christian Combatives. I'm your host and servant in Jesus Christ, Paladin Actual. Today I'm going to be asking you the question, are you too dumb to be a pastor? Now, this seems like a silly question off the bat, but really there's a point behind it. I want to address this question to people who are considering going to seminary, considering going into the office of the Holy Ministry. Maybe one of the obstacles in your way of going into the office of the Holy Ministry, going to seminary to see if you can become qualified to be a pastor, is you just don't feel like you're academically, intellectually inclined enough to do it. You may know a pastor who's just really wicked smart, or you know some people from seminary, you know a seminary professor maybe, and they're just on such a level intellectually that you're like, man, I can't do that. If that's what's required to be a pastor, that's way beyond me. So first and foremost, I want to get into what the Bible says about going into the office of the Holy Ministry. The Bible talks about this. It talks about qualifications for overseers. This is in 1 Timothy chapter 3. It talks about qualifications for overseer. Another word for overseer might be bishop or presbyter or priest or pastor or chaplain or whatever. It's that role of the pastor, the guy who wears the clerical tab and preaches, and the guy whose responsibility it is to take care of the sacraments, the preaching and the teaching in the church. So this is what 1 Timothy chapter 3 says. The saying is trustworthy. If anyone aspires to the office of overseer, he desires a noble task. Therefore, an overseer must be above reproach, the husband of one wife, sober-minded, self-controlled, respectable, hospitable, able to teach, not a drunk, not violent, but gentle, not quarrelsome, not a lover of money. He must manage his own household well, with all dignity, keeping his children submissive. For if someone does not know how to manage his own household, how will he care for God's church? He must not be a recent convert, or he may become puffed up with conceit and fall into the condemnation of the devil. Moreover, he must be well thought of by outsiders so that he may not fall into disgrace, into the snare of the devil. Okay, so first question, do you fit those requirements? Because these are the requirements before you enter into the office. Before you even go to seminary, you need to ask yourself, you need to pray about this, and you need to talk to your pastor and say, hey, pastor, do you think that I fit these requirements? And most men don't. Now, you'll notice in this list of requirements, it doesn't have an intellectual requirement. It doesn't say that you have to have a master's degree or a doctorate before you become a pastor. In fact, if you remember a lot of the people that Jesus called, he called them from a variety of different professions. He had Matthew was a tax collector. Luke, the evangelist, he was a doctor, a physician. Paul, he was educated. He was a Pharisee. He absolutely would have had that seminary training in advance. But Peter was a fisherman. We don't know what kind of education he had. So you've got different people who entered into the office of the Holy Ministry with different qualifications, with different backgrounds and stuff like that. So as you're going through this, there's only really one task that's going to require a specific degree of intelligence. And this is, he must be able to teach. Now, it is possible for somebody to just be incapable of communicating and teaching. In such a case, you would not be qualified to be a pastor, an overseer. You would not be qualified to fulfill your seminary requirements, because part of your requirement as a pastor is it's the office of preaching and teaching, administering the sacraments as well, but specifically the office of preaching and teaching. And if you cannot preach and teach, if you're unable to learn how to preach and teach, then you won't be able to fulfill your office. Now, that being said, this is not a requirement for you to be 4 deviations removed from the average human or something absurd and silly like that. Rather, this is something that you can learn. Some people frankly, you just can't learn some things. I'll give you a little bit of backstory for me first. Now, I was the dumbest one in my seminary class. I'll still maintain that. There's a lot of other people that went through the Concordia system first before me. They went through pre-seminary. They had pre-sem Greek. They had pre-sem Hebrew. They spoke Latin. They read German. They did all of these like academic things. Now, me, I'm coming out of the Marine Corps. I had a bachelor's degree in psychology, which is completely useless, but it's a bachelor's degree, which qualified me academically to go to seminary, which is a master's program. So for me, getting into class and being surrounded with so many brilliant minds and so many really smart people who have so much academic history behind them was really intimidating. The fact of the matter was, however, I'm not the only one who came into seminary without like the pre-sem background. There's a lot of people like they know when they're like 6 years old, they're like, I'm going to be a pastor. And every single one of their steps or academic educational steps along the way has led them to the office of the Holy Ministry. That was not me. I did not plan on being a pastor. I was out shooting stuff and blowing stuff up and trying not to get blown up myself. And one thing led to another, and eventually I ended up at seminary. But for me, it was actually a benefit not to be necessarily one of these academic people. Now, I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with them. In fact, there's a bunch of wonderful pastors, and some of them are actually going to be wonderful faculty at seminary sooner or later, or they're going to write books, they're going to write studies and stuff like that. I'm probably not going to be the guy who writes a best-selling theological book. I'm not going to be the guy who teaches at seminary. That's just not me. I am not that smart. I am not that organized. That being said, with my dumbness, and perhaps with your dumbness, one of the benefits is because there's a lot of things I didn't understand, I was able to ask a lot of questions and had a lot of humility. I was like, hey, I get that everybody else in this class gets it, but I don't understand that difference of those 2 points you made or whatever. And I would argue about this. And thankfully, because of this, I was able to get answers to questions at the dumb guy level, so that when I teach other people and they say, hey, pastor, I kind of got a dumb question, I'm like, great. Then I probably had a dumb question that was related to that too. So just because you're not one of these people who's been academically just in the pipeline the entire time, just because you're not one of these people who has a 3 million IQ and can just they know all of the biblical language and stuff like that, don't necessarily think that disqualifies you from being a pastor. God uses dumb people as well. This is a fact. God uses all kinds of people. So not everybody's going to be a Paul, a Saul who turns into a Paul who has an entire lifetime of theological education. Some people are going to be a Matthew. Some people are going to be a Peter. Some people come from different backgrounds. And this is the wonderful, beautiful thing that you're going to see if you go to seminary. And I would recommend that if you're considering it, contact seminary and go and have a visit on their campus and get to know some of the professors and stuff. Because the fact of the matter is, they've probably, I guarantee they've dealt with dumber people than you, because I've gone through this system and somehow I made it out on the other side. So, are you too dumb to be a pastor? Can you teach? Can you learn how to teach? Can you learn how to preach and teach? If you fulfilled all of the other requirements given in the Bible and you're able to learn the rest of the things that you need to do to be a pastor, maybe not. Maybe you are not too dumb to go to seminary. Maybe you are not too dumb to be a pastor after all. If you fulfill these requirements in 1 Timothy chapter 3, if you fulfill the requirements in 2 Timothy and in Titus and all the other passages that talk about being a pastor, if you fulfill these requirements and no disqualifiers or whatever, go ahead and reach out. If this is something that where you're, here's another point that I want to make. Some people, they're like, yeah, I wanted to be a pastor since I was 6 years old. That wasn't me. For me, it was like, the harvest is ready, but the workers are few. Somebody's got to do this job. Now, I am not the most qualified to do this job. I don't even know if I'm going to make it through seminary, but I'm willing to give it a shot. What about you? Are you willing to give it a shot? Are you willing to consider that, you know what? Someone's got to feed God's people, and I'm willing to try to do it the right way, even if I am the GPA, I've got the lowest GPA of any pastor who ever graduates seminary. I am willing to feed God's people to the best of my ability and trust in God to use me to fulfill the office of the pastoral ministry. If that's you, maybe you should consider it. Don't think so much about how smart all the other pastors and professors are. Yeah, they're smarter than you. That's just a fact. But you can still function in a way that God uses you. So pray about it. Think about it. Talk with your pastor about it. Talk with other members in the congregation, elders, other people who know you, who've known you for a few years. Say, hey, do I have qualities that might make me a good pastor? Am I able to interact with people in a way that I can show God's love and compassion and patience? Can I help with people when they're having conflicts and fights? Am I really excited about studying God's word and sharing that with other people? Do I have a heart for ministry, for children, for military members? Maybe you'd be a great chaplain, who knows? For missionary work, am I willing to endure hardship? Whereas other people might have a family, maybe you're a single person who's like, hey, I'm willing to go to, Tajikistan or whatever and be a missionary over there. You might have some qualifications that some people who are better suited to be seminary professors and write amazing books and have great theological blogs and stuff like that. You may have some qualifications for some work that God needs to get done that they don't have. Worth praying about, worth talking about with other people, worth talking about the admissions counselor at, Concordia St. Louis or Concordia Fort Wayne. I would recommend Fort Wayne, being an alumnus of that myself, but there's 2 great seminaries out there. I don't know. Give them a call. Ask. Worst they can say is, no, God's using you for other things, but being a pastor is not one of the things that you're qualified, or maybe it's not one of the things that you're going to be qualified for now, but let's revisit this down the line. It doesn't hurt, doesn't cost you anything to ask questions. Give it a shot. Who knows? Maybe you are not too dumb to be a pastor. I made it. God bless and take care.